So if it exceeded 4 years, at the end of 4 years, you were released from your debt and you could go back to your own household. That said, still a very patrimonial system, with the father of the household being able to sell off family members into slavery to pay off debts. You can imagine your dad selling you into slavery. Oh, I'm sorry. It's like that Monty Python sketch where it's medical experiments for a lot of you. And so this is a way of paying off debts. We do see family members sold into slavery. Inheritance typically goes to the first son. However, adoption was also very common. You could adopt other people into that position so they could legally inherit your estate. And these inheritors had converse legal responsibilities to their parents. So as a child, you are legally bound after your parents die to take care of them, in the sense that you'll go to their tombs, you'll provide libations, you'll remember them in the afterlife. So we see laws along those lines too. In addition to laws, literature and the arts are brought to new heights during this period. At least we have more recorded instances of it. We have some of the first love poetry that's ever written during this period. You can see on the left here, there's a tablet that is a love poem, which reads something like, "My beloved knows my heart. My beloved is as sweet as honey. She's as fragrant as wine in my nose. She is the fruit of my feelings which I bear forth." We see musical notation as well. If you guys remember when we were talking about the Ur lyre, we watched that very strange reconstruction of the Ur lyre being played, the bull lyre, again, without any sense of the music itself. But in this case, during the Old Babylonian period, we have musical notation. And there's been a lot of work done on this to reconstruct these notes and the systems that would be used. So if you forgive me for a moment, I think I've been able to figure out how to play this, and I'll play you a recording right now, so you can actually hear a tune from the Old Babylonian period. That is, if my iPhone is going to work. So anyway, you get the idea, right, of what this might have sounded like. Not exactly top 40, but and probably, of course, done with a different cadence, a different, and a whole bunch of other instruments too. But you can pick out a little bit of a tune there, which is nice, and sort of illustrates again these aspects of daily life that we so rarely get in the archaeological record. Babylon also brought sciences and mathematics to new heights. Of course, we've seen evidence for mathematics as early as writing itself. Writing, emerges as a system of accounting. But really, during the Old Babylonian period, we see a new emphasis on mathematics for mathematics' sake and science for science's sake. We see two different types of tablets for the most part. The first are reference tablets. And these are reference tablets that contain information, mathematical information. For example, square roots of numbers, cubes, even logarithmic equations. The second that we see are these, they're problem texts, almost like mathematical word problems, which are useful mainly for calculating distances and calculating area. So most of these mathematical texts are all about how you go about calculating area. So why would this be important? Why would you have an emphasis? Why would the state be interested in calculating area? Any thoughts? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's exactly correct. It has to do with being able to calculate out how much area a particular landowner has, down to the very least amount. I mean, you want it exact, so you make sure that the state gets its fair share. And this is done again in in a system that so you can assess taxation. In fact, we actually see some very complicated formulas for doing taxes, algebraic formula, quadratic equations, that sort of thing, that allow for multiple unknowns, so you can calculate compound interest. So if a landowner owed you X amount back 30 days ago at an interest of 23%, but then renegotiated his loan at 15% in the last 6 years, what does he owe you at the end of the day, right? This is what these tablets allow you to do. So we can see Babylon is really kind of getting blood out of a rock here. Similar to current taxation, we see an emphasis on being able to calculate these things. I should mention too that the numerical system used in Mesopotamia during this time is very different than the one that we have today. Well, maybe not so different. It's a sexagesimal system, meaning that it's based on units of 60 and not 100. So you have your units 1 through 9, and then 10s to 50, and then you go back again, full circle, to units of 1 and 60, which sounds a little weird, right? Like, how do you go about using a system which is just based and stops at 60? But actually, if you think about it, that's not so strange. We use this today quite a bit. What systems do we use today that are based in 60 and not in 100? Time, yeah, time, absolutely. So, right, 60 seconds to the minute. What else? We've got, say, right, circles with 360 degrees. And actually, when we talk about circles, it's quite interesting. The Babylonians, they knew pi. What is pi? Who can give me pi? 3.145, is it? Or 3.141? Right, okay. So Babylonians had pi very close. Actually, what they said it was 3 1/8, which is actually incredibly close to pi when you calculate it out. So they actually had this down. Actually, even more incredibly, let's do this. We have another tablet, and I'm sorry I didn't bring in an image of it, but when we're talking about establishing area, so it was known in Babylon that when assessing, again, area and the spaces of fields, if you had 3 fields which were adjacent to each other in this pattern, and each one was completely square, not my horrible rectangular things. And let's say we have field A, and field B, and field C. It was known during this time that the area of field A plus the area of field B was equal to the area of field C, right? Anybody know what this is? What if I did? Yeah, what if I did this? Right? It's the Pythagorean theorem. So 1,000 years before Pythagoras, right? So next time anybody tells you, again, I keep railing against the classics department, but you can see the Pythagorean theorem actually dates to the Old Babylonian period. Anyway, we also talked about omen texts, as early as Mari, but during the Old Babylonian period, these omen texts, whether they're taken from extispicy, right, looking at those livers, or celestial observations, they become much more codified, and a system of really understanding what certain signs mean. If an eclipse happens in the west versus in the east, what exactly does this mean? And we'll look at some of these a little bit later too, in addition to medical texts that also become standardized. So pi 3 1/8 is 3.125, so that's what the Babylonians had. So very close to 3.142. All right, so the Old Babylonian state, as powerful as it is, as much a charismatic leader as Hammurabi was, just like Shemshai-Adad in the north, just like Naram-Sin, these charismatic leaders, the empire falls apart after his death. his successors very quickly lose control of the outlying areas around Babylon, and the southern cities appear to go into revolt. We imagine there are probably a number of reasons for this. A lot of times, we can blame environmental changes, and we actually do have records from this time that maybe indicate drought or famine. These records are really interesting. In Egypt, for example, during the Middle Kingdom and the Old Kingdom, every year the height of the Nile would be measured. And actually there's a thing, you can go to Egypt and find the Nilometer. There are several of these in Egypt that would be used every year to assess how high the river was and therefore how much land was flooded. And again, a way of calculating taxation. So we can go back at these records and look at times in which Egypt had very low Nile floods, therefore less food. And it's no surprise that during these times, that's when we see breaks and revolts taking place in Egypt. Similarly, we can use texts of Mesopotamia in the same way. In Babylon, we see during this time that state land goes up for sale. We see more and more records dating to the end of the old Babylonian period of state land being sold and the price of that land dropping dramatically. So that's always a bad sign. That probably indicates, again, drought or famine or some sort of problem in which people aren't getting food, and we start seeing again this process of fragmentation that we talked about. Nippur and the southern city sites are actually deserted. They remain so for centuries, and Babylon shrinks back down to the size of a small city-state. And it's in this weakened state that in 1595, the city is sacked by a king named Mursilis of Hatti. And Hatti relates to the Hittites. We're going to talk about the Hittites in a bit. But really with the sack of Babylon by the Hittites, we come to the end of the Old Babylonian period and really the end of the Middle Bronze Age, and make our way now into the Late Bronze Age, which begins around 1600. So we're going to now shift into this new stage. But before we do, any questions on anything that we've just talked about? Anything to do with Hammurabi, with the Old Babylonian kingdom, science, literature? Okay. So really after the Hittites sack Babylon in 1595, we have this period of about 150 years in which it's kind of a dark age. We don't have many texts from this period. But when the smoke clears, we see the emergence of a new power on the scene. And that power is known as the Mitannian state, or the state of Mitanni. It's a very poorly understood political entity, but it appears to be a federation of city-states in northern Syria and Mesopotamia. You can see the extent of their holdings. And again, they take power around 1550 in this green area here. And interestingly, this group appears to have been ruled by a minority group of Hurrians. These Hurrians we talked about earlier when we saw the emergence of the Amorites, right? The Amorites coming in from the west and making their way into Babylonia, right? Hammurabi was an Amorite. The Hurrians take power around the same time, and now, right, they've established a state for themselves by 1550. And again, they're associated with nomadic groups, much more associated with horses and chariotry than, say, the Amorites. So sort of a horse warrior group. But again, poorly understood. Hurrian is a distinct language in and of itself. It doesn't belong to any of these other language groups. It's not Sumerian. It's not a Semitic language. But there is evidence that it's tied actually to Indo-Aryan names.